I still dream about the smell of that place. A nauseating perfume of industrial-strength antiseptic, ancient dust, and something else, something metallic, and faintly like freshly turned grave dirt that clung to the back of your throat, desperata for rent money after my bartending gig went belly up. I took the night orderly job at Elder Hollow, a creepy, gothic manor sinking into the fog-choked outskirts of Salem, figuring it'd be a cakewalk. Then Miles Carter, the head nurse with a smile as polished and empty as a new tombstone, handed me the new staff survival sheet. 3 rules. Rule 3 was, never ever let Granny Hexwell in room 13 read your palm. I almost snorted. The last guy, a nervous kid named Kevin, apparently laughed it off too. According to the day nurse's interesting lifeline, as Granny Hexwell cackled it, ended precisely on schedule, exactly how she'd gleefully predicted. A freak encounter with a runaway hearse. Elder Hollow loomed out of the swirling New England fog like a skeletal hand, its darkened windows like vacant eyes. Gnarled, ancient trees clawed at the perpetually overcast sky, their branches draped in clinging moss. The air was thick, damp, carrying the scent of decaying leaves, old wood, and that underlying chemical tang that never quite left the place. It was the kind of house that probably had its own zip code in the afterlife. Miles Carter met me in the grand decaying foyer. He was in his late 30s, impeccably dressed in crisp white nursing scrubs, his sandy hair perfectly parted, his demeanor radiating an unnerving, almost preternatural calm. "Mr. Morrison, I presume," he said, his voice smooth and modulated, offering a firm, cool handshake. "Welcome to Elder Hollow. We pride ourselves on providing a unique level of care for our rather unique residents." His tour was a masterclass in understatement. He pointed out the fully equipped but rarely used recreation room. Its dusty billiards table looked like it hadn't seen action since the Coolidge administration. The quaintly historic dining hall and the individualized care wing. It was in this wing, its corridors dimmer, the air colder, that he paused. "The resident in room 7, Miss Barkley, has specific dietary needs, and Granny Hexwell in room 13. He gestured with a perfectly manicured hand towards a dark oak door at the end of the hall, from which a faint, dry cackling could be heard. "Prefers not to be disturbed, unless absolutely necessary. And, of course, there's the matter of the orientation sheet." He handed me a neatly typed, laminated card. "Ring the dinner bell loudly for meal times. The zombie residents rely on auditory cues since their eyesight has deteriorated. Keep raw steaks in the refrigerator for midnight snack cravings, but cook them well for the vegetarian werewolf in room 7. When Granny Hexwell in room 13 offers to read your palm and starts cackling about your interesting lifeline, you've just learned your exact death date and method." I stared at it, then up at Carter, expecting some sign he was joking. I expecting some sign he was joking. His blue eyes were serene, unblinking. "Zombie residents? Vegetarian werewolf? Elder Hollow caters to a distinguished clientele with long histories, Mr. Morrison," Carter said, his smile unwavering. "The rules are simply long-standing accommodations. You'll find them quite effective." As he led me to the small, sterile staff room, I caught glimpses. A shambling figure in a faded dressing gown disappearing around a corner, its groan a low, rattling sigh. A deep, guttural growl, quickly muffled, from behind the door of room 7. And from room 13, that high-pitched, knowing cackle again, followed by a wheezing whisper that sounded like fresh meat. Later, alone in the staff room, trying to make sense of the madness, my foot nudged something under the cheap particle board table. I bent down and picked it up. It was a small, intricately carved wooden bird, no bigger than my thumb, its wings outstretched. It was clearly handmade, old, and it smelled faintly, but unmistakably, of sulfur and something else, something like dried blood. The first few nights at Elder Hollow were a baptism by weird. The air itself felt thick with secrets, heavy with the scent of dust, decay, and a strange ever-present potpourri of medicinal herbs, and something else, something wild and musky that seemed to emanate from room 7. My primary duty, it seemed, was to exist quietly and not ask too many questions. The dinner bell was an ancient, tarnished brass thing hanging by the kitchen entrance. Rule 1. I clanged it loudly at precisely 6 p.m., as instructed. The effect was immediate and deeply unsettling. A chorus of low, guttural groans echoed from various points down the dimly lit corridors. Then, the shuffling, slow, dragging footsteps, accompanied by the occasional soft thud of a limb hitting a wall. The zombie residents. They emerged like figures from a half-forgotten nightmare, their skin the color of old parchment, their clothes hanging loosely on emaciated frames, their eyes clouded and milky. One of them, a tall, gaunt man in a threadbare pinstripe suit, shuffled uncomfortably close, his cold, papery hand brushing my arm as he groped blindly towards the scent of lukewarm stew. I suppressed a shudder. Room 2 housed Felix. He was ancient, his skin like stretched vellum over sharp cheekbones, his eyes holding the weary wisdom of centuries. He was usually found poring over an enormous leather-bound tome that looked like it predated movable type, a half-finished game of chess on a small table beside him. When I brought him his evening nutritional supplement, a discreet, unmarked thermet of something dark and viscous, he looked up, his gaze disturbingly perceptive. "The rules here are not mere suggestions, young man," he'd said one evening, his voice a dry, cultured rasp. "They are the stitches holding together a very old, very frayed tapestry. Pull one loose, and the whole thing unravels in rather spectacular fashion." He'd then returned to his book, leaving me with a fresh layer of unease. Rule 2 came into play around midnight. A low, rumbling growl, like distant thunder, would emanate from room 7, followed by a single, surprisingly polite, but firm, knock. Miss Donna Snarl Barkley. "Young man?" Her voice, surprisingly refined despite the underlying growl, would call through the thick oak door. "My snack, if you please." Miles Carter had been very specific. Miss Barkley was a vegetarian werewolf, an ethical choice she made in her later centuries. He'd explained with that unnerving calm. She still gets the cravings, but prefers her protein well done. It helps with the digestion. The first time I cooked her steak, the sizzle on the ancient stove barely masked the sound of heavy claws pacing on the other side of her door. The shadow under the door would shift, lengthen, briefly taking on a more lupine, snout-like form before she'd open it just a crack. A surprisingly delicate, age-spotted human hand emerging to take the plate. The other raw steaks in the staff fridge, vacuum-sealed and disturbingly crimson, were for other residents with specific nocturnal appetites, Carter had said vaguely. I tried not to think about who. One night, while restocking the first aid cabinet in the main hall, a cabinet filled with an alarming array of silver-laced bandages and vials of what looked like holy water, I noticed something odd. One of the quieter zombie residents, a small hunched woman named Mrs. Gable, was shuffling past. As she turned, the loose sleeve of her dressing gown slipped, revealing a series of small, unnervingly neat, almost surgical-looking scars on her forearm. They weren't the ragged tears of an old wound or the mottled marks of decay. They looked recent and precise. Elder Hollow breathed around me, a living, groaning entity. I started hearing things beyond the usual zombie moans, and Miss Barkley's occasional pre-dawn howls, chanting in languages I didn't recognize, seemed to drift from the sealed-off east wing. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear a dry reptilian slithering from within the walls, or the sound of sharp claws scraping against stone from somewhere beneath the floorboards. The place was a symphony of subtle, unsettling sounds. Becca Hayes, one of the day nurses, was a welcome island of apparent normalcy. She was in her early 30s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, but even she seemed to carry the weight of Elder Hollow in the slight slump of her shoulders. "You're adjusting well, Jake," she said one morning as our shifts overlapped. "Most don't last the first week." She lowered her voice. "Just be careful around Miles Carter. He's observant, knows more than he lets on, and some of the residents. Their conditions have been a bit erratic lately. More intense than usual." She wouldn't meet my eye. Rule 3, Granny Hexwell, was an ever-present, cackling threat. I did my best to avoid room 13, but one afternoon, while delivering fresh linens, which Granny Hexwell apparently used for something other than bedding, judging by the faint smell of sulfur and singed fabric that always clung to her doorway. She was there, perched in her doorway. High-backed wicker chair just inside her room, her door ajar. She was ancient, withered like a dried apple doll, but her eyes were like polished black stones, glinting with an unnerving, mischievous intelligence. "Come closer, dearie," she rasped, beckoning with a gnarled, claw-like finger. "Such an interesting aura you have. Full of twists and turns. Let old Granny have a little peek at that lovely lifeline of yours." My stomach clenched. "No, thank you, ma'am," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, backing away slowly. "Very busy. Lots to do." Her cackle, dry and rattling like dice in a leather cup, followed me down the corridor. "Oh, they all say that, Ducky." But fate always has time for a chat. Later that day, Miss Barkley cornered me in the hallway near the dining room. She was in her human form, though her amber eyes still held a distinctly wolfish gleam. She sniffed the air around me, her nose wrinkling. "The air is wrong today, boy." She growled softly, her gaze sharp, tainted. "Something's tampering with the old balances. Watch that smooth-skinned Carter. He smiles too much. And you!" She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a low rumble. "Watch your own lifeline. It's got a few unexpected tangles coming up." That night, alone in the staff kitchen making myself a cup of stale coffee, I found it. Tucked behind the ancient buzzing refrigerator was a small, discarded biohazard sharps container. Inside, nestled amongst a few used insulin needles, was an empty syringe much larger than the others, and a tiny, unlabeled glass vial. The vial contained a single drop of a viscous, faintly glowing silver liquid. The container was supposed to be emptied daily by Miles Carter. Only Miles Carter. My suspicion of Miles Carter grew from a nagging unease into a cold certainty. He spent an inordinate amount of time in the restricted East Wing, a section of the manor that was supposedly closed for renovations, but from which I'd occasionally hear strange, rhythmic humming, or a low, thrumming vibration that resonated through the floorboards. The residents housed there, according to the faded chart by the locked door, were among the oldest, most volatile. Becca became my reluctant confidant. She'd noticed it too. "It's like they're cycling," she'd whispered one morning, her voice tight with worry. "Old man Hemlock, the ghoul in 3B, his regeneration sped up for a week, almost youthful. Then he crashed, worse than ever. Zama with the Banshee and Fora. A whale was strong enough to crack windows last Tuesday. Now she can barely manage a squeak. She bit her lip. And those accidental deaths we've had this past year. Mr. Coffin, the bog mummy, just desiccated overnight. And poor Elspeth, the sprite who fell into the koi pond. Sprites are naturally buoyant, Jake. They don't just drown. Felix, during one of our late-night chess games, he usually beat me in under 12 moves, his ancient mind still razor sharp, offered another piece of the poisoned puzzle. There are always those, young Jake, he'd murmured, his gaze distant, who seek to bottle the moon's essence, or steal the grave's deepest secrets for a fleeting imitation of true immortality. Such endeavors rarely end well. For anyone involved, the full, horrifying weight of Rule 3 came crashing down on a Tuesday. Miles had hired a new temporary orderly, a nervous young man named Arthur, for a special deep cleaning project in the East Wing. Arthur looked like he'd seen a ghost even before he started. Around 3 a.m., I was doing my rounds when I heard Granny Hexwell's distinct, high-pitched cackle erupting from room 13, louder and more gleeful than usual. A few minutes later, Arthur stumbled into the staff room, pale as a sheet, his eyes wide with terror. She grabbed my hand. He stammered, his voice shaking. In 13, I was just walking past. She said she saw my lifeline, and that I'd take a tumble on the grand staircase before the cock crows and meet my maker with a nasty crack to the noggin. He laughed, a high, hysterical sound. Crazy old bat, right? All right? Despite myself, a chill snaked down my spine. The grand staircase was a death trap of rotting wood and loose banisters. Just before dawn, as the first gray light began to seep through the grimy windows of Elder Hollow, a piercing scream echoed through the silent manor. We found Arthur at the bottom of the grand staircase. His neck was broken, snapped at a horrifyingly unnatural angle. His eyes stared up at the decaying chandelier with an expression of ultimate surprise. On the third step from the top, where he had apparently tripped, lay a single iridescent black raven feather. There were no witnesses. Miles Carter, when he discovered the body, merely shook his head with an expression of practiced sorrow and made a note on his clipboard. Later that morning, as I helped Becca change the linens in a recently vacated room, its occupant having passed peacefully in his sleep, according to Miles, I saw Miles Carter leaving the restricted East Wing just for a second as he turned. The cuff of his pristine white uniform hitched up for a fleeting instant. I saw it. A faint, silvery, almost luminescent sheen on the skin of his wrist, like a tattoo made of moonlight, quickly covered as he adjusted his sleeve. It looked disturbingly similar to the single drop of liquid it found in that discarded vial. The atmosphere in Elder Hollow grew thick and poisonous, like the air before a violent summer storm. The accidental deaths were no longer isolated incidents. They were becoming a grim pattern. A stringy-haired banshee whose wail could shatter glass was found voiceless and withered. A nominally placid swamp hag from the Louisiana bayous went on a destructive rampage, her eyes glowing with an unnatural green light, before collapsing into a pile of fetid muck. Miss Snarl Barkley was perpetually agitated. Her fur, even in human form, it seemed coarser, her nails longer, bristling, her low growls a constant thrumming undercurrent. The taint is strong, she'd rumble at me, her amber eyes narrowed with suspicion. The old magic is being twisted, stolen. Carter smells of false life and stolen power. Felix, usually so stoic, became even more withdrawn, his ancient eyes filled with a deep, weary sorrow. He seeks to bypass the natural order, young Jake, he whispered one night over a stalemated chessboard. to harvest without sowing. Such arrogance always demands a terrible price, and often it is the innocent or the unwilling who pay it. Becca was a nervous wreck, but her fear was solidifying into a grim determination. "We have to find out what he's doing in that East Wing, Jake," she insisted, her voice low and urgent, "before there's no one left to save." Our chance came during the annual Founders Day Remembrance, a somber, little-attended affair where Miles Carter was obligated to give a stultifyingly dull speech in the main hall to a handful of local historical society members and the more lucid residents. It was the one time he seemed genuinely distracted. Armed with a set of master keys Becca had borrowed from Carter's meticulously organized office, we ventured into the forbidden East Wing. The air here was heavy, humming with a barely suppressed energy. Strange, rhythmic pulsing sounds throbbed from behind locked doors, and the metallic, chemical scent I'd occasionally noticed on Carter was overpowering. One door, labeled Specimen Observation Zeta, was ajar. Peeking inside, my stomach churned. It wasn't a residence room. It was a makeshift laboratory. Cactus lined one wall, containing small, whimpering creatures I couldn't quite identify. Things with too many eyes, or limbs that bent the wrong way, all of them looking sickly and terrified. A gleaming steel table held an array of surgical instruments, beakers filled with brightly colored, glowing liquids, and a complex network of tubes and wires leading to a large, humming centrifuge. And on a nearby desk, an open ledger detailed extraction protocols, potency amplification trials, and subject rejuvenation failure rates. It was a charnel house of unethical, magical, and biological experimentation. He's farming them," Becca whispered, her face pale with horror. "Harvesting their essences." Suddenly, from behind us, a voice dripping with amusement. "Such a keen interest in the custodial arts, Mr. Morrison." "Miss Hayes, I had no idea." Granny Hexwell stood in the doorway, her black eyes glittering like obsidian chips. She wasn't cackling now. Her expression was one of intense, almost predatory curiosity. Naughty, peeking into places where little orderlies shouldn't. But then, she tilted her head, a sly grin spreading across her withered face. "Fate does love a curious cat. Often leads them to the most interesting cream." Before we could react, she shuffled past us, deeper into the lab, her gaze fixed on a particularly large covered cage in the far corner from which a low, guttural growl was emanating. "Ah, yes," she murmured. "Ah, yes," she murmured. This one has a very short thread left. Almost snapped. Carter's little masterpiece, isn't he?" The door to the lab swung open wider. Miles Carter stood there, his usual serene smile firmly in place. But his eyes were like chips of ice. "An unscheduled inspection, Granny. And bringing guests? Just admiring your handiwork, Miles, dear," Granny Hexwell rasped, not turning. "This one," she gestured to the growling cage, "feels particularly ripe for a spectacular unraveling. Your quest for unearned vitality always did have such delightfully messy consequences." Carter's smile tightened. "I'm merely exploring avenues for enhanced residential well-being." "Of course you are, dear boy," Granny cooed. She then turned her glittering gaze on me. "And you, young Jake, your lifeline. Oh, it's positively vibrating tonight. So many possibilities, so many delightful little knots and tangles, and one rather abrupt snip, not too far from now, unless..." Her eyes flicked towards Carter, then back to me, a sudden sharp intelligence in them. "Unless, of course, the weaver gets their own threads tangled first." It was then that Felix appeared in the doorway behind Carter, silent as a wraith, his ancient eyes burning with a cold fire. "Your charade is over, Carter," Felix said, his voice surprisingly strong. "Or rather, your other charade." Carter turned, his composure finally, visibly cracking. "Felix, always the moralist, even after all these centuries. Some of us remember the cost of such immortality as you seek," Felix retorted. He looked at Jake and Becca. "This man, he walks among us, yes, but he's not one of us in the way you think. He made a bargain long ago, traded something essential for the right to dwell in the shadows, to study, to meddle." Felix gazed bored into Carter. "Tell them, Miles. Tell them what you truly are. Tell them about the emptiness where your soul used to be." Carter laughed then, a harsh, brittle sound. "A soul? An outdated concept, Felix. What I have is knowledge, power, the ability to distill eternity." He gestured around the lab. "These creatures are merely raw material." As he spoke, the growling from the large cage intensified, morphing into a series of furious, guttural roars. The cage began to shake violently. Granny Hexwell let out a delighted cackle. "Oh, here it comes, duckies, the grand finale." With a deafening screech of tortured metal, the cage door burst open. What emerged was a monstrous hybrid, something that might once have been a resident, now twisted and augmented by Carter's experiments. It was huge, covered in matted fur, with too many limbs, glowing red eyes, and a gaping maw filled with razor-sharp teeth. It roared, its gaze fixing on Carter with pure, unadulterated fury. "My ultimate creation," Carter hissed, a manic light in his eyes, but there was a tremor of fear in his voice now. It's not fully stabilized." The creature lunged. Carter scrambled back, his calm finally shattered. The lab dissolved into chaos. Beakers smashed, equipment overturned. Felix, surprisingly agile for his age, shoved Jake and Becca towards a side door. Miss Barkley, drawn by the commotion, appeared at the main lab entrance, her human form already starting to shift. Her eyes glowing amber, a low wolf-like snarl ripping from her throat. "Carter, you defile this house." Amidst the pandemonium, Granny Hexwell stood untouched, a serene, almost gleeful smile on her face, watching the threads of fate twist and snap. She caught Jake's eye, winked, and pointed a gnarled finger towards Miles Carter, who was now desperately trying to fend off his enraged creation with a heavy steel tray. "His lifeline, dearie," she cackled above the din. "So very fragile right now. And look, a delightful little knot I didn't see before, tied to something, soulless." Her gaze flicked to the monstrous creature, then back to Carter, her black eyes dancing with terrible ancient amusement. The hunter was about to become the hunted, his own dark alchemy turning against him in the heart of his grotesque sanctuary. The laboratory became a whirlwind of monstrous fury. Carter's creation, a grotesque chimera of mismatched parts and raw, amplified rage, tore through the room, its roars deafening. Carter, his pristine white uniform now splattered with glowing alchemical fluids, and his own blood, scrambled desperately. His scientific detachment replaced by raw, animalistic fear. The tables had turned with a vengeance. Miss Barkley, now fully transformed into a massive silver-furred werewolf, her eyes blazing with righteous fury, joined the fray. She didn't attack Carter's creation directly, but rather herded it with terrifying precision towards its creator. It was a primal, brutal dance of predator and prey, the air thick with the scent of fear, blood, and ozone. Felix, his ancient eyes narrowed, moved with a speed that belied his frail appearance, smashing vials of Carter's volatile serums, creating small, acrid explosions that added to the chaos, but also seemed to disrupt the monstrous creature's focus momentarily. The imbalance he created, it cannot hold, he yelled over the din. Becca and I, meanwhile, were trying not to become collateral damage. We ducked behind a reinforced steel cabinet as Carter's creation swiped a massive, clawed hand where we'd been standing moments before. Granny Hexwell perched precariously on a high stool amidst the wreckage, cackled with delight, her black eyes darting back and forth, following the brutal ballet like an avid sports fan. "Oh, the threads! The threads!" she shrieked gleefully, snapping and tangling. Such beautiful, bloody embroidery. Then Carter, cornered, his face a mask of terror, did something desperate. He grabbed a heavy, lead-lined containment box from a shelf, a box I'd seen him handle with extreme caution before, and hurled it at his creation. The box shattered, and a blinding, pure white light erupted, accompanied by a piercing, high-frequency scream that made my teeth ache. Carter's monster recoiled, shielding its eyes, whimpering. Even Miss Barkley flinched, a low growl of pain rumbling in her chest. The white light pulsed, and for a moment, I saw what looked like a swirling vortex of pure energy within it. "The nullifier?" Felix hissed, his face tight with alarm. "He seeks to unmake it entirely. A dangerous gambit when one's own essence is compromised." But the nullifier didn't just affect the creature. It seemed to be drawn to Carter himself. As the light pulsed, thin, silvery tendrils snaked out from it, not towards the monster, but towards Miles Carter. They wrapped around his limbs, his torso, and he screamed, a shrill, ululating sound of pure, abject terror. A sound stripped of all humanity. My essence," he shrieked. "No, I am anchored." Granny Hexwell's cackles intensified. Anchored to what? An empty promise? A hollow shell? The nullifier seeks nothingness. And you, my love, are already halfway there. The silvery tendrils tightened. Carter's form began to flicker, to lose cohesion, as if he were an old photograph fading in harsh sunlight. His screams became distorted, digitized, then dissolved into a final, pathetic whimper. And then, with a soft, implosive pop, Miles Carter, head nurse of Elder Hollow, practitioner of dark alchemy, was gone. The nullifier's light faded, leaving behind only the scent of burnt ozone and a profound, chilling emptiness where he had stood. His monstrous creation, disoriented and seemingly weakened by the nullifier's proximity, slumped to the floor, its roars fading to confused whimpers. Miss Barkley, slowly shifting back to her more human form, though still bristling, nudged it cautiously with her snout, then let out a low, mournful howl. An eerie silence descended upon the ruined laboratory, broken only by Granny Hexwell's contented sighs and the ragged breathing of Becca and myself. "Well," Granny said, daintily dusting off her shawl, "that certainly cleared the air, and a rather final snip for dear Miles. His lifeline was always more of a frayed shoelace, truth be told." She winked at me. "Seems your own little thread just got a bit more room to wiggle, young Jake." The immediate aftermath was a grim, surreal cleanup. Felix, with a heavy heart, oversaw the permanent sedation of Carter's more dangerous, unsalvageable experiments. Miss Barkley, surprisingly gentle now, helped guide the confused, less aggressive creatures back to their reinforced rooms. Becca, shaken but resolute, began documenting the extent of Carter's atrocities, her medical knowledge invaluable in understanding his twisted notes, her own immunity to Granny Hexwell's predictions remained a quiet mystery. When I asked Felix about it, he merely smiled a thin, knowing smile. Some bloodlines carry older, quieter protections, young Jake. Like a shield woven from moonlight and forgotten whispers, this haze walks under a fortunate star, or perhaps a very old, very powerful blessing. The pharmaceutical network Carter was part of remained a shadowy, unanswered question. We found encrypted files, offshore account numbers, but nothing that would lead to a clear indictment of anyone beyond Carter himself. Elder Hollow, it seemed, was just one small, rotten cog in a much larger, more terrifying machine. Weeks turned into months. Elder Hollow, scarred but still standing, began to find a new, albeit fragile, equilibrium. The passing of Miles Carter, officially attributed to a tragic laboratory accident involving volatile chemical compounds, a report I helped Becca fabricate, with some creative input from Felix on arcane terminology, left a power vacuum. And somehow, almost by default, I found myself stepping into it. Not as a manager, not really. More like a reluctant custodian of the damned. The rules were still there, of course. The dinner bell still rang, though perhaps with a little more care now. Steaks were still cooked, raw and well done, for Miss Barclay's particular palate, and Granny Hexwell. Well, Granny was still Granny, cackling from room 13. Her black eyes missing nothing. But something had shifted. The residents, those who remained, seemed calmer, the oppressive atmosphere of fear and exploitation slowly lifting. Felix took to organizing chess tournaments in the dusty recreation room. Miss Barclay started a knitting circle, her sharp needles clicking with surprising and even rhythm. Though her creations still tended to look alarmingly like wolf pelts, even some of the more withdrawn zombie residents would occasionally emit a contented, almost happy-sounding groan. Becca became the de facto head nurse, her compassion and sharp intellect a balm to the home's old wounds. She still searched for answers about the network Carter was involved with, but it was like chasing shadows. Some fights, she'd say with a sigh, are bigger than one rundown home for monsters in Salem. As for me, I was no longer the sarcastic, skeptical bartender. Elder Hollow had stripped that away, replacing it with a weary understanding and a grudging respect for the thin veil between worlds. I'd learned that some horrors were ancient and inevitable, while others were chillingly human, born of greed and a lust for power. One crisp autumn evening, I was doing my final rounds. The fog was rolling in, thick and white, muffling the sounds of the outside world. As I passed room 13, Granny Hexwell's door was ajar. She was sitting in her wicker chair, a tattered tarot deck spread before her. "Evening, young Jake," she rasped, her eyes glinting in the dim light. "Come for that palm reading yet?" I actually smiled. "Not tonight, Granny. Maybe next time." She cackled. "Always a next time with you, isn't there, dearie? Your lifeline. It's still full of interesting little squiggles. More tangles than a ball of Miss Barclay's worst yarn." She paused, then tilted her head, a sly look on her face. "But I did see one rather prominent knot, just a few years down the road. Involves a rather fetching young woman with eyes like a stormy sea, a broken-down Ford pickup, and a rather enthusiastic chupacabra with a fondness for antique maps. Should be quite the adventure." I just shook my head, continuing on my rounds. The world outside Elder Hollow might be oblivious to the things that lurked in the shadows, but here, within these ancient creaking walls, life, or unlife, as it were, went on. The rules still applied. The monsters were still monstrous, but maybe, just maybe, under new, and decidedly more reluctant. Management, this peculiar little retirement home, had found a fragile kind of peace. Or perhaps, I thought, as I locked the main doors against the encroaching fog and the distant, mournful howl of something that definitely wasn't a neighborhood dog. Elder Hollow was simply biding its time, waiting for its next interesting lifeline to walk through the door. Because in a place like this, the last call was never truly final. And the vacancies, well, they always had a way of filling themselves.